Welcome back, guys, to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, today on Tuesday, January 7th, a day after a pretty dark day in the NFL, usually where the regular season ends, and if you're not in that group that makes the postseason, usually you get a lot of news like we've seen yesterday and heading into today. So with that being said, we're going to start off today's show by talking about all the coaching changes, a little bit of the rumors, but I'll save that for tomorrow's show, kind of speculating a little bit more, but getting through all the latest firings and some coaching positions that might be safe and all that sort of stuff that we already know up until this point. Then, I didn't get a chance to go over some of the games that we saw on the weekend, so we're going to do a lot of that today, talking about the Broncos' big win, the Buccaneers' big comeback win, and also the Falcons and the Chargers in there as well. So make sure to stick around for all of that. But before we get started, a reminder to you guys, if you guys were unaware and you guys want to get involved with the show through any question, opinion, or just anything that's on your mind, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and your contributions in any which way possible to the show are always a great thing for these live shows, and we thrive on your energy and insight. So again, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and it gets featured on the show, and also that I'm able to read it, there's an easy way to do that now just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. I'll be able to read it and, read it out loud, and then get your guys' thoughts, perspective on anything we talk about on these live shows, or just really anything that's on your mind. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box, and let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what gripe, what curiosity you might have. Anything really benefits the live show. So go ahead and do that at any point during these shows. But with that now out of the way, like I mentioned, we're going to get to all the coaching news that we've already seen here so far in the NFL. Now that the regular season's done and dusted, the majority of the league is already thinking ahead. They're already thinking to new head coaching positions, maybe new general managers, who they're going to draft in this upcoming year's NFL draft. All that sort of stuff is just going to build over the next couple of months, right? But it all starts with making some of those hard decisions and changes that, are hard, because obviously, in perspective, people are losing their jobs, and you never want to see that, obviously. But there's been already a lot of news regarding a lot of these head coaching spots and who could end up where based on who's already left. So we're going to start off with the positions that have already been decided, right? Who's been fired so far to this point. Earlier today, I didn't write this down on my sheet, but it became breaking news earlier today that the Tennessee Titans fired their general manager, Ran Carthon. After 2 seasons with the Titans and a 9-25 record, they decided to part ways with him. And also, even more recent, the Las Vegas Raiders decided to fire their head coach, Antonio Pierce, after his first season as the real head coach, because that first half year, he was the interim head coach, but this past year, he got the full-time gig. It only lasts 1 year. The Raiders made the decision today to fire him, although they are going to keep going with their current general manager, Tom Telesco. Usually some people thought that Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco would be out the door simultaneously, but it looks like Tom Telesco has saved himself, and it really only looks like Antonio Pierce will be the only one departing from Las Vegas. So those are the 2 earliest ones. And elsewhere, some that have already been announced, starting from yesterday. The Jaguars fired Doug Pederson yesterday. The Patriots, obviously, we talked about firing Gerard Mayo. Surprisingly, the Seahawks fired their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, in his first year after a very successful year at the college level at the University of Washington. He came over to Seattle, for the Seahawks, and I thought he did a pretty decent job, but unfortunately for him, the Seahawks, thought differently, and they fired him yesterday as well. In the same sort of realm here with offensive coordinators, the Cleveland Browns also fired their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, who, if you guys remember, previously was with the Buffalo Bills. He came over to Cleveland, and the offense wasn't great. So, based on the results and everything like that, and I'm going to get into it a little bit more in just a little bit, but Ken Dorsey is the one that ultimately pays the price for how bad the offense was and the struggles, mainly on that offensive side of the ball, but also their offensive line coach, Andy Dickerson, was also fired along with Ken Dorsey. Then the Cincinnati Bengals fired their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, and the Colts also fired their defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley. So those are the guys, pretty much all the pieces of news that have been decided already. Now, going into the ones that are safe, because we've seen these organizations in a pretty unprecedented sort of way make a statement that they're keeping these guys. Usually in the past, you don't really see it that much, like organizations coming out and kind of reassuring everybody that they're going to be keeping their head coach or their general manager. But this season, we've had the Giants, the Colts, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars come out and say that they're going to be keeping, their general managers or their head coaches. So the Giants were really one of the first ones to do it. Their owner, John Mara, stated in an official announcement that he is going to keep general manager Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll for the upcoming season. There was some speculation that maybe one of them could go, more likely than not Brian Daboll. He was the one on more of the outside part of, this whole situation rather than Joe Schoen. But in the end, John Mara decided to keep both of them, trying not to shake up the organization too much and completely restart again. He figured it was the best case scenario for this team where they are right now to have the same sort of leadership going into next year. Then, similarly, the Indianapolis Colts and their owner, Jim Irsay, also reassured that their general manager, Chris Ballard, and their head coach, Shane Steichen, would also be returning in 2025. So that might have come at some of the displeasure for some of the fan base, considering the frustrations that were building up in the fan base. And I think it's become one of the louder ones for the Colts that I think I've seen in recent years. Usually it's not such like a big fuss about, their general manager, Chris Ballard, who has been there for a little bit now. And, Shane Steichen, the pressure's definitely mounting, but I didn't think that he would be one that I'd be thinking would be leaving the Indianapolis Colts. So that was a decision that I felt pretty on board with, for sure. I didn't think the Colts really needed to get rid of them, so I was all for that decision. The Miami Dolphins, similarly, their owner, Stephen Ross, also said that their general manager, Chris Grier, and their head coach, Mike McDaniel, will also be returning next year as well. Again, not a real big problem with that. I didn't have too much of a problem with Mike McDaniel or Chris Grier this season. I thought most of their problems were on the field, so I know the head coach has a lot to do with that, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least for one more year. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, surprisingly, they kept their general manager, Trent Baalke, in a weird way, because Doug Pederson was fired, and a lot of people from the reports I've been seeing felt that Trent Baalke should have also, been fired, right? A lot of people thought that was going to be the expectation, but their owner, Shad Khan, decided to keep him. And it was a really awkward moment. If you guys saw it, I saw it on social media where the owner, Shad Khan, was basically in a Zoom call with a couple media members, and they asked him a question along the lines of, what would you do in a scenario where maybe your new head coach wants to work with a different GM? What would you do then? And basically he said that whatever that new head coach wanted, that he would ultimately agree with, and if he wanted the general manager fired, he would side with him, all while Trent Baalke, who kept his job, was also in that Zoom call. So very awkward moment there for it to just kind of play out like that. But for right now, Trent Baalke is going to keep his job in Jacksonville. So those are all the guys that look to be safe, barring any major changes around the coaching, tree in the NFL. And then there's a couple guys, or really one guy now, in Mike McCarthy, who there is a lot of speculation around, but there isn't anything real concrete about whether he's going to leave or whether he's going to stay. Jerry Jones has kind of been as, has been as indeterminate, as confusing as maybe he usually is, with all season looking like he's going to move on from Mike McCarthy, but then in recent weeks not giving off that impression, so to say. So who knows? Maybe they end up keeping him. If I'm Mike McCarthy, I just think it's time for a split. I think it's time to get something new in there. I can't have Jerry Jones coming back as the owner and general manager. I can't have Stephen Jones in there as well. I can't have Mike McCarthy back in there. Dak, Micah, CeeDee, whoever they have at running back, it's going to be the same thing. I know they're going to be healthier, but it doesn't fill me with so much optimism. So something's got to change there, and I think it's time for Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys to just go their separate ways. And if I'm Mike McCarthy, honestly, with some of the connections elsewhere, some interest from other teams, I think it's time, if I'm Mike McCarthy, for me to just leave. I think that would be the best for my career, again, if I was Mike McCarthy. And then just my thoughts on some of these other moves. I was surprised by Ryan Grubb, like I kind of started off by saying, because his offense, one of the biggest benefactors of his offense was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had a Pro Bowl caliber season. Although he didn't make it, he really broke through this year. And I thought their offense, while it was a little hit or miss sometimes, the offensive line wasn't great. Say what you want about Geno, they put up a decent amount of points, more points than a good amount of the NFL this year. And they were in a lot of close games, and I didn't think, looking at them, that their offense needed some new play calling or anything like that. So I was pretty surprised by that, pretty confused if I'm being honest. So I don't know what led to that. And for the Bengals, even a little bit, not as much, just because obviously the defense was the biggest part of it, right? And Lou Anarumo was the coach of that unit. But as it went on, it kind of looked like they were turning a corner. I mean, they played pretty decently this past week against the Steelers. Maybe not saying much because the Steelers are on a downfall, but I don't know. I felt like from how people were talking about them and the way that I just felt like it was more of a personnel sort of thing rather than the coaching, I thought that they were at least going to give him one more chance, maybe really attack the positions of needs on that side of the ball, and then give Lou Anarumo another chance. But clearly they decided to not go that way, and they fired him. And the last one I'll say is about Ken Dorsey. I kind of mentioned it before, but to fire Ken Dorsey, I feel like a lot of it, like Lou Anarumo, like who else has been fired? Like, I guess Antonio Pierce, in a sense. When you fire a guy like that, you immediately think that their side of the ball, if you're a coordinator, right, is the problem, right? Ryan Grubb, Lou Anarumo, like I mentioned, if they're getting fired, you think, oh, the defense was bad, like the Bengals defense was. So you can kind of logistically understand that decision. But for Ken Dorsey to be fired, a good amount of the season, Kevin Stefanski was calling the plays, right? He was the one calling the offense, and the offense really was struggling the entire year, not just when Ken Dorsey took over. And I mean, at that point, I was at a spot where you really couldn't save it, and the majority of it also was on Deshaun Watson, if we're being honest, not living up to the expectations that they had for him coming in. So for them to fire Ken Dorsey and kind of make it look like, all the offense was on him when Kevin Stefanski was calling it for the majority of the season before he turned it over to Ken Dorsey, I thought that one also wasn't very, not fair, because, nothing's really fair, right, when it comes to these things, but it just wasn't one that I would have personally made. Again, I probably would have given him another year, and maybe you draft the quarterback, second overall, that's always a possibility, or you go out and sign like a free agent or something like that and see what you do with somebody else, maybe outside of Deshaun Watson, not just because of his struggles, but because of his rehab and it kind of taking a step back a little bit. He might miss a good amount of time in 2025. So I would have given him the opportunity to maybe work with somebody else, and then you really get an understanding from that point. But now that's out the window, now that he's fired, so they're going to have to get a new voice in there. And I'd imagine Kevin Stefanski is going to go back to calling the plays, but who knows? Maybe they find another voice out there. But for right now, that's all the news around all the head coaching, positions and news that we have going on so far. So with that being said, we're going to go back to the weekend and start recapping a little bit of these games. Starting off with the Buccaneers win over the New Orleans Saints. They clinched the division for the 4th year in a row, and also Mike Evans wrote his name in the history books as well. Find out more about that game when we return after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, I'm losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network, to talk a little bit more about this past weekend and the games and what went into them, how each of them broke down and ultimately ended this one that we're going to talk about with the Buccaneers winning over the New Orleans Saints. And going into this game, the Buccaneers had really done enough, as well as getting help elsewhere from the Falcons and some of the other results around the NFC. They've done enough this year that they were in a position still where all of their future was still held in the palm of their hands, basically, right? All they had to do was win. There was no scoreboard watching. There was no, none of that, right? All they had to do was just worry about themselves, which is a fantastic spot to be in, right? That's what everybody who finds themselves, on the brink of making it or missing out, that's the ideal situation you want to be in going into the final game of the regular season. And although they did end up winning, it didn't start so well for the Buccaneers in this game. They actually began with only 6 points in the first half, and it was really a fantastic second half performance by Baker Mayfield. And really the thing you get with Baker Mayfield and the character and really his will and just his personality to go out there and really have the whole Bucs team embody his personality and his will to win, to really get this offense going in the second half, to lead a second half comeback effort that led the Buccaneers to winning their fourth straight game, not their fourth straight game, their fourth straight division title in the end, when they defeated the Buccaneers 27-19 in the end. And this was Baker's first win, now that I mentioned him and how important he was to this comeback effort. This was Baker's first win when trailing by 10 points or more. Previously, he was 0-43 when he found himself in this position. So, that's a great, feat to overcome there. But I don't think it's really too surprising, because the Bucs, in my opinion, definitely deserved to move on. Just because of everything they went through, overcoming the injuries and everything like that, and really playing great, specifically on the offensive side of the ball over the last couple weeks here to end the season, to be in a position where I felt that they definitely should be in the next phase of the season, right? They should be in the postseason. And with that, not only was Baker able to accomplish that, kind of get over that hurdle, but he also helped culminate, the regular season with him having a personal best in passing yards and also passing touchdowns. He finished the year third in the NFL with 4,500 yards and also 41 total passing touchdowns as well, which is tied for second in the NFL. Both of those, like I mentioned, were career highs. And yeah, it took for him to kind of lead the second half effort, because the first half really had them trailing the majority of that first half really having to do with the fact that they were missing 3 starters on the defensive side of the ball. So not only were they struggling on offense, but also that defense was also kind of reeling in a sense in the first half. The Saints were really playing pretty well, and really Spencer Rattler in the first half had 151 yards and was 21 of 28 in that first half to lead the Saints to a first half where they were leading at one point 16-6. So, the 16 points might not be that impressive, but for the fact that the Bucs only had 6 points was a bit worrying, right? You go into halftime thinking like, all right, that wasn't great at all by the Bucs, but they have a whole second half to not only kick it up a notch offensively, but really get their defense to just do enough. And that's exactly what happened, in the second half. Like I mentioned with Spencer Rattler, he was 21 of 28, 151 yards in the first half, but then in the second half, he only threw for 89 yards, and he was 5 of 14, and the Saints were only able to put up 3 more points, while the Bucs went on to score 21 more points from halftime to the end of the game. So it was also great to see the Buccaneers still trying to get Mike Evans his incentive. That was something else that I was also keeping track of, because that's a huge thing, right? Because Mike Evans constantly one to be overlooked, constantly one to not be mentioned, like with Jamar or Justin Jefferson or like A.J. Brown. Nobody really brings up Mike Evans in those conversations, right? But he is the model of consistency, obviously. He's done everything for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the fact that, they were in a position to win there towards the end, but they were still trying to get Mike Evans that incentive with 36 seconds left, and pretty much, like I said, the game wrapped up at that point, but they still threw a quick, out route to Mike Evans. He had it 9 yards after that when he only needed 5 to tie with Jerry Rice for, consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. It was a fantastic moment for him to get it, and not only that, but celebrate there towards the end, where obviously it's a big deal to win the division, but not only for him to celebrate like that, and also his teammates, and really doing it at home as well, literally when the game was already over. I thought that was a pretty cool moment, and, kudos to the Buccaneers, Baker, Todd Bowles, and Liam Cohen, obviously, for all, not just taking a knee, not just going the traditional, boring way and just saying, all right, let's just knee it. It's team first, right? We got to focus on the win, right? Because these things matter. The individual things matter. The incentives matter for these guys. You like to reward them a little bit for all the hard work, especially the kind of historical effect that Mike Evans has, not only for the Bucs, but in the NFL. It's cool to see, organizations do that. It's part of the reason why I didn't like the Eagles not allowing Saquon to break that record. It's not anything to do with money, obviously, but that's a historical thing. And I know, they're focusing on the team and winning Super Bowls and the big picture, right? But the things matter like this. And I thought it was cool to see the Buccaneers do that for Mike Evans. And, obviously they did need to win, but, based on the results and everybody checking the Buccaneers score and also the Falcons score, right? Because if the Bucs lost and the Falcons won, it would have actually been the Falcons representing the NFC South. But because the Falcons ended up losing, if the Buccaneers would have lost this game, it wouldn't have mattered. They would have still made it on. But, they don't have to worry about that now. And we can look ahead a little bit here to the playoff matchup. I'm not going to go too far into it because I'll probably save that for later in the week when we go preview it a little bit more in depth. But just looking at it right now, the Bucs have the opportunity again to host the Washington Commanders in the first round of the playoff this upcoming weekend. If you guys remember, they beat them 37-20 in week 1. But from that point on, you're not going to see that same Jaden Daniels that you saw in week 1. That was his first, taste of an actual NFL game, right? Not preseason, not anything like that. Now you're getting a much more... It's weird to call him like a seasoned player because it's still only his first year. He's going to get a lot better. But it's not going to be the same week 1 Jaden Daniels, right? He's matured a lot more. He's carried this team on his back when he needed to, and he's put in a lot of great performances this season to bring the Commanders to where they are right now. but also, get them in these positions where people are not just overlooking them, right? They're not just overlooking a rookie quarterback, right? They're really taking this seriously. But also, in that same breath, you gotta take Baker Mayfield in that same sort of level of importance, I think, as Jaden Daniels, at least, if not more, because of his experience. But both of them have had phenomenal seasons. Both of them have had Pro Bowl caliber seasons. Jaden Daniels actually made the Pro Bowl, where maybe if you're Baker Mayfield and, just members of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you feel like Baker should have made the Pro Bowl as well. So that's going to be kind of interesting, a little neat there that, you get that matchup between these two quarterbacks. You also get a matchup between two defensive head coaches in Dan Quinn and Todd Bowles, with offensive coordinators on each of their sides that could become head coaches next season, right? Liam Cohen has had a fantastic season taking over for Dave Canales with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's certainly gotten some looks to be a head coach, and Cliff Kingsbury as well, from that rocky portion of his career with the Arizona Cardinals, now having great success with the Commanders, and especially Jaden Daniels, he's also getting looks to be a head coach. So it'll be interesting to see those two matchups when they face off this weekend. And just in general, it'll just be fascinating to see how much more different this game is than week one. I don't expect it to be very similar, but I'm just interested to see how much more, mature and efficient each of these two teams looks in the first round of the playoffs, right? Because the Commanders are riding in on a good bit of momentum. Same thing for the Buccaneers as well. So having these two teams, two young, exciting teams meet in the first round is certainly going to be one of the games to look out for. I'm pretty sure it's on Sunday Night Football as well. So just adding even more excitement and build-up around it should be a great game to watch on Sunday. But that's not all the games, obviously, that we're going to recap. We've got a few more to get to, starting with the Denver Broncos. On the other side of the NFL in the AFC conference, they clinched the final seed in the AFC by defeating the Kansas City Chiefs, and not only defeating them, but shutting them out in Denver to celebrate in front of their home crowd to return back to the playoffs. We're going to break down that game. What did we like about it, or just reactions in general, and again, looking a little bit ahead to that matchup against the Buffalo Bills. So don't go anywhere. That segment is coming up next.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Jumping back into our recaps of Week 18 in the NFL, we got to take a look at the Broncos securing the final playoff spot in the AFC with just an insane finish, really, for the entire season. Not only for Denver, but really for the entire playoff scene in the AFC, because it was the perfect scenario for really the Broncos, not really so much for the Bengals and the Miami Dolphins, obviously, but really for the Broncos. If you take into account not how the season ended and how great it was for them, but a couple weeks before this where we saw how Denver had the playoff future in their hands, much like the Buccaneers did for a couple weeks now, not just for Week 18, but they lost a very close game to the Chargers that really would have helped them secure a spot. Then, in another game where they were facing a direct rival in the Cincinnati Bengals, they lost a grueling game in overtime, which was just very harsh on them, and if they would have lost this game and just crashed out of the playoffs by losing their last 3 games, would have been completely devastating, like I mentioned last Friday, I want to say. So it was great to all see, just culminate, for them to arguably play their best game of the entire season, to send them to the playoffs, was really cool to see. And with all the hype and speculation with the really the Bengals, because the Dolphins, they weren't really looking good in their game at all, but the Bengals put a lot of pressure on them, obviously with their win over the Steelers. The Bengals did everything that they needed to, right? They just needed to win and just watch the games on Sunday to see it all go their way. And they almost got everything to fall, right? They got 2 out of the 3 things that needed to happen. But unfortunately for them, and really our main focus in this segment is talking about the Broncos and how, this was their last chance. And they really came out all business, not messing around whatsoever, because quite frankly, they just destroyed the Kansas City Chiefs backups, really, in a game that was 38-0 in order for the Denver Broncos to go back to the playoffs for the first time since 2015. Kansas City had not been also shut out since 2012, over almost 13 years ago, that the last time the Chiefs were shut out. So this was a pretty important game. Of course, there's no Patrick Mahomes, no Kelsey, no real starters, right, playing, but still, I mean, this wasn't just like a 17-15 game where the Broncos barely squeaked in. They went out there with a mindset to, regardless of who was playing, they were going to go full throttle, trying to go out there and prove why they deserve to be in the playoffs. And I thought they did exactly that. They were off to a hot start, the Broncos, and really Bo Nix in this game by setting a franchise record for most completions to start a game with 18 straight. And they scored touchdowns on their first 3 drives of this game. And also, Bo Nix set a franchise record for completion percentage at 89% in this game as well. So all of that just suggests that the Broncos really knew what the assignment was, and they weren't going to take, anything for granted, or they weren't going to second guess anything. They weren't going to be conservative. They really went out there and, like I said, played an exceptional game, which they needed to for them to get into the playoffs for the first time in almost 10 years. To get back really was a special moment. And not only was the offense great, Bo Nix played a fantastic game, but also their defense. They led the NFL in sacks with 62. They held Carson Wentz to only 98 passing yards, and he was only 10 of 17 on the day. And he got the start, obviously, because the Chiefs were resting all their starters, right? So that's the thing that is always going to be brought up in this case. But, I mean, being shut out and winning 38-0, I think just sends a much more louder message than, like I said before, than just winning like 17-13 or something like that and just really relying on your defense. This was a complete team effort that I was pretty pleased to see, just as a neutral sort of voice in all of this, or at least I try to be. It was cool because I mentioned last week too in our preview that I felt like the Broncos really deserved to be in it, right? I felt like if you're going to take the 3 teams, right, you're going to take the Dolphins, the Bengals, and the Broncos, right? I felt like if you looked at the culmination of their seasons from where it started to where it ended, the Broncos getting off to a rough start, but continuing to trust this process, to trust what Sean Payton was saying, to believe in their defense, and eventually believe that Bo Nix was going to become that guy that Sean Payton really believed he was capable of being. And for all that to kind of develop over the course of the season and see from where they started to where they ended, I thought they really made the most compelling case to make the playoffs, whereas the Bengals started off slow, and it became like a running trend for them that they always start slow, and that you always kind of felt like, oh, because they had Joe Burrow, they were just going to click it into gear and eventually just make the playoffs, right? Because that's just what they do. And it didn't work out that way, obviously. And for the Miami Dolphins as well, they were just dealing with a lot of injuries. And, if you can't win in below 50 to 40 degree weather, I know that's kind of like the running joke, but it's a serious thing. If you have such a bad and glaring record in weather like that, I don't think you necessarily deserve or really need to be in the playoffs as well. So I thought the Broncos, to me, made the most compelling case to be in it, and it showed through the score and how Bo Nix played, and also their defense. One thing that's interesting, though, that I did find out about this game was that because the Chiefs were resting their starters, and the last time they did play was on Christmas Day, and that they obviously won't play again until the divisional round of the playoffs, which is January 18th or 19th. That's going to be at least 24 days off for the starters, which is insane. Over 3 weeks off. I know they're still going to practice and everything, but not playing in a game and really being fresh for that amount of time it's just next level. Like obviously the Chiefs have been here before, right? They know what they're doing. They know how to prepare themselves for the playoffs, right? Not just acquiring home field advantage, right? But making sure they have it all locked up before the last couple weeks here, so they get those few extra days off, and it always ends up paying off. So it's just another reminder that the Chiefs are essentially playing chess while everybody's still playing checkers. That's a huge advantage, obviously. So that was something I really didn't take into account. And also, this win for Denver over the Kansas City Chiefs was only the second time they've beaten them in their last 19 games between each other. And more on Bo Nix also. He threw for 4 touchdowns, which brought him to 29 total touchdowns on the year, which was only 2 touchdowns shy of the NFL record by a rookie quarterback for passing touchdowns in their rookie year. The record is still 31 held by Justin Herbert in 2020, obviously in his first year. So, I mean, you're not comparing them, but that's pretty good company to be in. And not only that, but to play him in the division each and every year, along with Patrick. The AFC West is going to be pretty fun to kind of keep track of over the next, 7 to 8 years or something like that with these guys at quarterback. So that's awesome to see as well. And just overall, I thought a much needed win, a dominant performance by Denver as well. And not only that, now we can kind of look ahead and talk about this matchup with the Buffalo Bills a little bit, because it's not only that the fact that they have to go to Buffalo and, play a potential MVP in Josh Allen, but they're also going to see a familiar face, right? Because for whatever reason, if you guys weren't aware, Von Miller is on the Buffalo Bills now, and it's been exactly until the day that they play in the wild card this upcoming weekend. It'll be 3,255 days after the Super Bowl in which the Broncos won in 2016 over the Carolina Panthers that Von Miller has played against, or with, in this case, with the Denver Broncos. And now he's going to see his former team this upcoming weekend in the playoffs, which was pretty interesting, pretty cool to me that, they're going to have that familiarity there, and they're going to have to try and beat one of their best players in that franchise's history this upcoming weekend as well. And funny enough, also, this matchup between the Bills and the Broncos are the only two teams that have managed to beat the Kansas City Chiefs so far. And for whatever reason, if the Broncos pull up the upset of upsets and defeat the Bills, they're going to have a date with the Kansas City Chiefs potentially in the divisional round. So that's also something that's, still a long ways away and still a hypothetical, but it's in the back of my mind a little bit. But it'll be interesting how this game kind of goes, because the Broncos have a great pass rush. They play a lot of man coverage because they're able to, with Pat Surtain, Riley Moss, and McMillan in there as their cornerbacks. And the fact that they get to the quarterback so fast too makes your secondary look that much better as well, obviously. So the Buffalo Bills, they're good. They have good playmakers, with Keon Coleman getting better. Amari Cooper's obviously great. Khalil Shakir's very underrated. So they got good players to kind of match up against them, but I wouldn't necessarily say that, excuse me, that they're like man beaters or something like that, right? Like, they're not, like, in that sort of matchup, you'd immediately think like a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase, right? I don't think the Bills receivers are necessarily that right now. So it'll be really interesting to see how they kind of match up in that response. So, the Broncos have also matched up pretty well against the Bengals' high-powered offense, in their last game. So that'll also be interesting to see how they take the lessons from that and apply it here to the explosiveness of the Buffalo Bills offense. And it's also important to take into account how the Bills are still undefeated at home. So it's going to take a lot. It's going to be a tall task for a rookie and Bo Nix to go in there and lead this effort to upset the number 2 team in Buffalo. But it would really make a lot of people look at Bo Nix a lot differently if he was able to do this. Jaden Daniels is looked at as the best rookie in this class, but if there was ever an alternate universe where Bo Nix was able to defeat Josh Allen, not only would it look really bad for Josh Allen, right? Because that's just how it goes. Bo Nix would really cement himself in some elite company, I think, if he was able to do that. But we're not going to go into the ins and outs of it yet, but just kind of giving you guys some kind of notes on this matchup before we preview it later on this week. So that's everything we took from the Broncos win over the Kansas City Chiefs. And now we're not going to move too far away from the AFC West because we're also going to bring up the Chargers' big win over the Las Vegas Raiders. What did this win mean for the Chargers in terms of seeding? And are the Chargers the most dangerous wildcard team in the AFC playoffs? We're going to answer that question when we return in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Jumping straight back into the action now to talk some more about the games this past Sunday. Looking at the Chargers game now. The Chargers and Raiders game, both teams in the AFC West. We just finished talking about another AFC West team in the Denver Broncos and how they got a big win. I wouldn't say the Chargers win is as important as that because they were obviously going to make the playoffs, but the Chargers were one of the teams that were already in the playoffs, and they had the opportunity to move up and have a better matchup for the consensus, feeling around the AFC and potentially get the 5th seed instead of staying put at the number 6 seed. So because of what happened on last Saturday, when the Steelers lost to the Cincinnati Bengals, it meant that the Chargers only needed to win this game and they'd jump over the Steelers and they'd have the 5th seed instead of number 6. And that's exactly what ended up happening when they won 34-20, and they were able to end the year on a 3-game win streak, and now will face a Houston team who many feel, many including myself, is the most favorable matchup to play on the road out of all of the top 4 teams in the AFC, just based on, I think, just general feeling and senses around everything. I mean, you look at the Chiefs, right? They're the Chiefs. The Bills haven't lost at home, and the Ravens feel like they kind of understand now that they got to run the ball a lot with Derrick Henry and really play through him and Lamar Jackson. So out of all of them, it looks like the Texans aren't really kind of stumbling at this point, but they're just not hitting on all cylinders quite as much as the other 3. And Anthony Manzano, welcome to the show. But a lot of people are not really giving credit to Denver for winning that game against the Chiefs, because the Chiefs basically sat their whole starting lineup on defense and offense. I mean, yeah, I think that's, for people not to give them credit, I think that's a bit, kind of short-sighted, because it's not just about the fact that they won, and again, they are playing backups, right? That's a fact, but the way that they played, the fact that they shut them out, not only, if you're going to play backups, that's the kind of game you want to see against backups, right? Like beating them like 40-0, 38-0, just completely blowing the doors off of them. They did exactly that, so I don't know how much more, people need to see from the Broncos to kind of give them the credit they deserve, right? There's no world where they beat the Chiefs or really any starting team that should be in the playoffs by that score. So to me, they did exactly what they were supposed to do, right? Again, it's not like they just squeaked through like 20 to 17 and won with a game-winning field goal or something like that. They destroyed the backups. So I thought they did exactly what they needed to, and they sent a message, right, that they're really up until this level, right? They're not just kind of squeaking into the playoffs like they have no business being here. They got something to say with that defense, and Bo Nix, if he's able to make a couple plays, it could be a longer game and a more frustrating game for anybody that has to play them in the playoffs. So, I mean, people should be giving a bit more credit to them, in my opinion. So, that was a good question, though. But more on to this game, like I mentioned, it feels like the fact that the Chargers are now playing the Texans feels like a more favorable matchup, in my opinion, just for the comparison of the Texans to the other three teams that won their respected divisions as well. But for the other side of things, just here briefly, the Raiders, we got the news today that they fired their head coach, Antonio Pierce. So despite the fact that they won their last two games, they finished the year 4-13, and that obviously went into firing Antonio Pierce. And yeah, I mean, they're at a weird spot now. I think I don't have the draft order in front of me, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think they have like the 7th or 6th pick in this year's draft. So, I mean, if they want a quarterback, that's not really where you want to be. So that's, some part of the frustration also with Antonio Pierce, I guess, for some people that, wanted a tank to get a better quarterback. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. So there were some frustrations there. I thought that they should have kept them one more year because this team really, in terms of personnel, wasn't up to par whatsoever. But, they made the decision, and now they're going to have to figure that out as well. Another question here, is it unfair to have such a high expectation for the Broncos? What else could they have done? Maybe their defense had to basically shut the offense down in terms of yards, productions for the Chiefs. I mean, yeah, but I think we're nitpicking at that point. I mean, they held Carson Wentz to under 100 yards. They didn't allow a single point. So, I think they did as much as they could. So, I don't think it's bad. It's unfair to have such high expectations for the Broncos. I wouldn't say that. Because, at least my expectations, I don't know what the general consensus is for the Broncos, but my expectation for the Broncos, if we're going to talk start of the year, was that they were going to be all right, around 500. So they've already exceeded expectations for me. Anything more that they're able to get is just, icing on the cake for me. For anybody maybe that thinks that they could get to like the conference championship or even the divisional round, I think you're overstretching now. But, I think that just depends on what each individual expectations are for the Broncos, right? Do you think it's a bad look for the Patriots when it comes to the coaching carousel that they fire Mayo and within the next 2 to 3 weeks they're going to be hiring Mike Vrabel to be their next head coach? Yeah. Without interviewing minority coaches. Yeah, the minority coaches is a touchy subject. I definitely think that they should interview more. Like, there's a lot of good ones out there. I think they interviewed Byron Leftwich today, though, so that's, a good sign in, that respected question. But, Aaron Glenn is somebody I think that they should definitely interview. He's been fantastic. Byron Leftwich is going to be one that they interviewed today. I'm trying to think of anybody else. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of too many. I guess you could interview guys like a Vance Joseph because of how well he's done with the Broncos, or they're escaping me now. Off the top of my head, I can't think of too many. But, guys like that, I think they should interview them. But it definitely feels like, Mike Vrabel is the guy that they really want to go after, and I don't think it's a good look at all. I mean, I talked about it yesterday a little bit more when the Gerard Mayo news was a bit more recent, and I didn't like the fact that they did it. I didn't like the fact that they felt like, or at least they made it look like Mike Vrabel was going to maybe take another opportunity, so they were just going to kick Gerard Mayo out just so they could have a better opportunity at getting Mike Vrabel. And at that point, it felt like whatever Gerard Mayo did, if Mike Vrabel was going to become available, it didn't matter what Gerard Mayo did, because at that point, they were going to fire him anyway, because they wanted Mike Vrabel anyway. So at that point, you're not being evaluated on your performance, right? It just feels like you were going to get fired anyway. So that's what I really didn't like about it, to your point as well. So yeah, I think it is a bad look, but I mean, it's a results-driven, business, right? So they're just uberly focused on getting better. And if they think Mike Vrabel's that guy, it doesn't look good. I don't really like it, but it's hard to argue with them. If they really feel that's the way they got to go, then they're going to do it, right? So that's kind of what I would say in defense of the Patriots in this respect. So just to move back to the Chargers here, though, against the Raiders, to get to the question really with the Chargers that I kind of wanted to touch on here just briefly. Are they the most dangerous wild card team in the AFC at least? I mean, looking ahead to it, if we're just talking wild card teams, Chargers, Steelers, Broncos, the Broncos make a good case, but the Chargers beat them twice this year, and the Steelers are the complete opposite, right? They've lost their last 4 games, so it can't be them. So based on that, if we're just looking at wild card teams, I think the Chargers are definitely the most dangerous one. And if you want to bring in both conferences, you look at them, the Commanders, the Packers, and the Vikings. I probably wouldn't put them over the Vikings, but, the Commanders, I think they're right there with the Commanders, and even the Packers as well without Christian Watson. I think the Chargers, talking about the entire playoff picture, are definitely in the top 2 most dangerous wild card teams that we see heading into this year's playoffs. And I'm really favoring them over the Houston Texans. I think they're more than capable of beating them. And, after that, if the Broncos end up losing to the Buffalo Bills, then the Bills would probably play the winner of, well, I guess it depends on the results, but barring no surprises, right? If the Ravens were to win, the Bills were to play the Ravens, and if the Chargers were to win, like I'm expecting them to, they would play the Kansas City Chiefs again. And they played them in both instances to 2 of the closest games that the Chiefs have had to play this season, right? It was only a 7-point loss in week 1, and then only a 2-point loss in week 2 in Kansas City. So that'll be a very interesting game where, it's hard to beat a team 3 times. The first game, it was only a 7-point loss. Then it got a little bit closer, and it was only a 2-point loss. And now, to play them again and kind of having that familiarity there, I'm not saying I'm picking against the Chiefs because I'm not going to do that, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy playing the Los Angeles Chargers, right? In a season where it's Jim Harbaugh's first season back in the NFL, where maybe a lot of people felt like it was going to take some time, especially without Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and, really a lot of, pieces on the offensive side of the ball. But they've proven a lot of people wrong, and they're really exceeding expectations, I think. So to play the Chiefs again, it'll be just like a huge game of just like trying to find different ways to beat your opponent, right? Because it's hard to do it 3 times. So if that ever comes, if that does become the situation, then that'll be something that we'll talk about in that moment, but not too much right now. But the Chargers have really been impressing everybody for the majority of the season, and I think just a massive shout out to Jim Harbaugh for bringing them this far in only year 1. This is only year 1. Like, they're going to get a lot better. They're going to get a lot better on the offensive side of the ball. They're going to get more playmakers. They're going to maybe shore up that offensive line and get more pieces to that secondary. So if you think they're really good now, just wait until year 3 at least. And this Chargers team is really going to be competing, I think, to be one of the best teams in the AFC because they got the quarterback, they got the head coach, and they really got a good identity about them. So I'm feeling good about the Chargers in these playoffs, but also just for years to come. So that is that segment, talking very much about the AFC West today. But we're going to move on to our last segment and discuss the Falcons and Carolina Panthers game. There was a lot of circumstances for the Falcons in this game, but unfortunately they weren't able to get it done. But it's not like we can't talk about them, right? Because there's a lot to talk about in regards to this game, the future of both organizations with Michael Penix and Bryce Young. A lot of positives that could be coming down the line for both of these two teams. So we're going to discuss that as well as discussing the game this past weekend when we return after this break. Thank you guys for joining me for our last segment on today's show. Just recapping one of the final games here from this past weekend. The final games of the NFL regular season in 2024. One of them that we had to talk about was the Falcons and Carolina Panthers game. And despite missing the playoffs, again, for the Atlanta Falcons, they've not made the playoffs since 2017. It might look bad right now, especially with how you consider the entire season and how it started pretty well with Kirk Cousins and now obviously him being on the bench and you go with Michael Penix and how things really shifted. I don't believe it's all bad right now for the Atlanta Falcons at least, because at least they know they got a good feeling about their future franchise quarterback now in Michael Penix through all the ups and downs of this season, like we talked about with Kirk, with leading the division at one point at 6-3, then obviously losing it to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Kirk seemingly getting worse as the season went on. The defense, from where they started, looking pretty promising against the Chiefs, the Eagles, even the Steelers to some extent. It really kind of deteriorated as well, along with the rest of the team. There might be some questions about Raheem Morris, potentially, but I think through all of that, through all those ups and downs, because there was a lot of ups, right? Kirk was playing pretty well at one point in this season. Through all of that, I think you can take the silver lining and acknowledge the fact that this decision that you made in the draft last year, where you were questioned heavily, by me included, to kind of draft a rookie quarterback in Michael Penix, now looks to be like the best decision that was taken in that first round. So at least you have that, right? A lot of teams can't say that. A lot of teams can't say that they got a young franchise quarterback that they really trust in. And I think the Falcons have that in their organization for sure. And even through yesterday's 44-38 overtime loss to the Panthers, it was a back and forth battle between two young quarterbacks, and you want to talk about tribes and tribulations. Bryce Young has gone through it as well this season. Being benched, being talked about like, oh, is his time in Carolina done? Should he want to trade? Have the Panthers mess this all up again? Is Bryce Young considered an early bust already? He had to deal through all of that, and he kept his head down and just continued to work. I mean, the record doesn't say the entire story, but just look at the way that they finished. I think Bryce Young definitely deserves a lot of credit for that. And Michael Penix Jr. in this game against the Panthers, he definitely gave it his best effort with throwing for 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception that kept Atlanta in it really the entire contest. And I think really throughout the majority of these 3 games, constantly, I think Michael Penix being in there as the starting quarterback, I think it really has shown us the full potential and the full ceiling that the Falcons can really get to when they had the right quarterback in their system. And we didn't see it, obviously, with Desmond Ridder. We didn't really see it with Kirk because of some maybe health limitations or anything like that. And now we're starting to see it with Michael Penix. So I think that's also one of the biggest things to kind of take away from this is that we can see it now. We can see the vision now. This is what this offense is supposed to look like. And even though he's only played 3 games this season and Michael Penix ends his rookie season with a 1-2 record in the 3 games that he started, it's still, it doesn't go without saying that he played very well. And there's a lot of positives you can take from that as well. And on the other side of things, I mentioned Bryce Young before. He threw for 3 touchdowns, 251 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns as well to help Carolina, finish with a 5-12 record. You're not going to write home about it, but on a positive note, it's still something, right? You played pretty well against the Chiefs. You played pretty well against the Eagles. 2 games you arguably should have won. Probably should have beat the Buccaneers that 1 week in Carolina as well. There's been glimpses, right? And Bryce Young, I think, showing a consistent level over the last few weeks here to end it. I think you could take that and run with it, much like the Falcons are going to do with Michael Penix. And both of these 2 teams now finish with losing records again. Both of them have 7 consecutive losing seasons for each of them. So, yes, it's bad right now, but I think that's not going to be the case next year. I think both of them, really more so the Falcons than the Panthers. I'm not going to get too overzealous here. The Falcons got a good chance to end that streak next year. I truly believe that now with Michael Penix. So the season for Atlanta really ends in agony after, of course, losing the division, at one point being 6-3, and having it all crumble with Kirk Cousins and their defense, like I mentioned before. But, there were some inspiring moments in there, like I mentioned. And similarly for the Panthers, they finished the season with a 2-5 record over the last 7 games. But, this win over the Atlanta Falcons was their highest point total of the entire year, and really a revitalized Bryce Young, who got even more of a boost of confidence from his head coach, Dave Canales, who was the one that ended up benching him. But to go from that point to now, after the game, Dave Canales saying that Bryce Young is their quarterback, I think is the perfect ending for this season, and hopefully for the Carolina Panthers to find some more positives going forward, right? It doesn't look like they're going to fire another head coach, which is great, and it looks like they're not going to shuffle to another quarterback, so that's also another win for them. And this game's madness, along with the Saints and Bucs game, was the most exciting part of the 1 o'clock window to kind of follow along simultaneously, to see the Falcons winning and the Buccaneers starting to lose, then the Buccaneers making a comeback and the Falcons trying to stay close with the Carolina Panthers. All of that was great to see. But unfortunately, the Bucs ruled off everything by just beating the Saints, so it didn't really matter what the Falcons did in the end. But, overall, what we took from this game and really from Bryce Young and Michael Penix now seem to be on the upward trajectory, hopefully heading into the offseason. You can't help but ask, this question was brought up today in our production meeting. An interesting sort of hypothetical, right? Would the Falcons have been in a better spot to make the playoffs if they made the quarterback change earlier? I would probably say yes, because I don't really see, with what I've seen from Michael Penix over the last 3 games that he did play, I don't see him playing terribly against the Seahawks, right? I feel like that game's a bit more competitive, and I actually have to pull it up here because I failed to remember what the Falcons, what they kind of did over the last few weeks, specifically when in regards to each specific game. So, I mean, the Commanders game, obviously Michael Penix played in. Against the Vikings, that was a very high-scoring game. I don't know if Michael Penix wins that one, but that one looks a bit closer. Against the Chargers, oh God, how could I forget that one? Michael Penix is not throwing, 4 interceptions. Michael Penix isn't doing that in that game, so I think that's also one that they could have won over. The Seahawks game's another one. So yeah, I think if they get 1 or 2 of these games back, it could be a different story. So in regards to that question, I would probably say yes. And also, it's great that they have their quarterback. It's fantastic that they do. But going forward for both of these teams, I'm not going to list off what the Panthers need to do because they obviously need to do a lot. But looking here for the Atlanta Falcons, right, they got their quarterback, which is awesome, but they desperately need to do something about that defense because it looks like, they have their guy. Michael Penix Jr. has unlocked the potential of this offense, right? But it's unfair to just put it all on him, right? To just think that you have Michael Penix now and that he's going to average 24 points per game is unfair to him. So you got to do something to help him out. Raheem Morris has a pretty good defensive background, so he should be more than adequate to go out and find the defensive help that he needs. Pass rush is the number one priority, but you could also do with any real additions, honestly, to this defense. At linebacker, at secondary, getting multiple pass rushers, right? Just improving that side of the ball is going to be huge. I'm pretty sure they have a pretty good cap space situation, so there's going to be free agents out there. There's going to be guys that they should go after, and it's exciting. It's exciting because you have a pretty decent draft pick, and you see the vision now a little bit, like I said before. So, yes, it stinks right now to not make the playoffs, but going forward, I think the Falcons have really set themselves up in a great spot for a young, up-and-coming team in that NFC. They're doing it the right way, and I like the fact that they didn't get rid of Raheem Morris. There was a lot of talk about it, the collapse and everything like that, but I think giving him one more season and showing what they can do next season, if they add the necessary pieces and they develop Michael Penix, it could look a lot more different, right, next season. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to watching the Falcons next year and seeing how much better they improve in a division that's by no means, just under lock and key for the Buccaneers. The Falcons beat them twice this year, so it's very much wide open in that division. One of the most wide open ones in the NFC. So that'll be intriguing, but that's still a long ways away. We still got to get through the playoffs this year, so we're going to talk about that more as we go through this week. But as for right now, I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. As always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football podcast, please check out the Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where you can see more of these live shows and more content really around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, including breakdowns, previews, recaps, all the breaking news around the NFL as well could all be found on both YouTube channels, so go make sure to do that. And just for today, thank you guys again for joining me, and I hope to see you guys back here again, same time tomorrow with me, discussing some more about the playoffs and some of these off-season moves around the NFL.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired.